This is called Advocacy Redemption of the City. And in order to do this work, you can't do it by yourself. You need a team. And so, so Jesus had a team, right? He had 12 people and a few women, and they were the ones that mostly funded the work. But it's so important that we create a learning community for getting this work done. Our local housing team in Pasadena has been at this for about 20 years, and we're still learning how to be a team and what that looks like. It's about trust, it's about relationships. It's important that you have with any team, looks like this, with any team. Do you find it? It's called Advocacy Redemption of the City. And basically, I'm calling it affordable, Advocacy 101. And so, how many of you have been part of an effective team? Okay. What were some of the elements that made that team effective? Why did you love going? And what made it so attractive to you to want to be part of that team? Just yell out what it was. It had purpose. It had a purpose. What else?
Collegiality.
Collegiality. Okay, what else?
Commitment.
Pardon me? Commitment. There was a commitment. Okay. What else made it?
Different people good at different things.
Everybody used their strengths and gifts. So within the body of Christ, some of us are more of the head, right? The thinkers. Some people are just really good in seeing everything. You need those types. Some people are the doers. They've always got their hands in business. You've got to have a variety, all different roles that people play. What else about teams? Trust. What about fun? Do you want to go back to a team that's not fun? No, So you need to figure out how times to celebrate to make it fun. And so Jesus, I'm sure he had fun with his 12 men, but it's essential that you build a team. Research. So we talked about the importance of knowing these issues and these policies. It's just essential that we research. You already probably know more now than, and sorry Becky, and sorry Marianne and others that are part of the city, but many city councils members do not get this training. There's not, unless they have a vested interest and they go out of the way to learn it, it's not something they necessarily have had any training in. Now what's surprising is that many of the city staff also don't have this kind of training. So I sat down with, I was telling someone earlier, this housing element, this planning document for the city, for every city in the state of California has to do this wonderful planning document to plan for sufficient housing for all income levels. And so this document requires that you do public engagement. So the city of Monrovia had a number of different public engagement opportunities. A lot of it was online. And but in a city like Pasadena, we have to make sure that it has access to everyone. So oftentimes you need language translation. I went to a meeting for our last round of I've been to 3 different housing element plans now. And the last one, they had 1 meeting. Guess how many people attended that meeting? 4. 4. And this was planning our housing for the next 5 to 8 years. I was appalled. I sat there and I said, what happened? Where's all the people? Everyone has to live in a house in the city, but no one's here part of the plan. And they said, well, we didn't really let a lot of people know. I go, okay. Let's change that, okay? I will gladly plan 3 more public engagements at 3 churches, and we did. And it was great. People got more educated. They began to learn what the housing element was. So I know other another friend that's part of the Christian Community Development Association down in Oklahoma. And boy, the city was thrilled to see how interested they were in this. And they hosted all kinds of public engagement. The city just came in, they brought all the people and made sure people were engaged in the process of planning. So you have to not just research the issues and all the potential ways to create housing that's affordable. You need to research, when does this come up again? When will this planning document start? This is from 2014 to 2021. But it's usually about a year before that they start looking at public engagement. So you need to keep this on your radar. Next year is when it starts? Okay. Okay, thanks. And you start getting on your radar and considering how, pardon me? Yeah, just go on the city website, it's right there. Yeah, so making sure that you're aware of these meetings, hold the city accountable and just say, so when is this going to start? How can I be part of that planning? Get to know what the document's about. One thing we found in the city of Pasadena, in the goals, and one thing I so appreciated about the one here, they had goals with deadlines. So by certain years, you're supposed to have this brochure created for second units. You know, by a certain year, you're supposed to have a brochure developed for affordable housing developers so they would know what your city's like. So I don't know if those things actually got completed, but I do know that they had goals. Now, if there's nobody there holding the city to meet those goals, they often don't happen. And so that's what happened in Pasadena. So we were supposed to have a study on second units, on those back houses, the accessory dwelling units. Well, that study was supposed to take place in 2001. It got rolled into the next 5 years, never took place. It got rolled into the next 5 years, it never took place. And we're looking at the housing element, go, you know, they won't even put it on the agenda at the city council, so how are we going to deal with this? And they haven't even started doing the studies. So they submitted the housing element to the state, and our little group called the state and said, you know, we'd like you to reconsider and not actually approve the city house, the housing element, because there's no deadlines. So could you send it back to the city? Let's get some deadlines. And they did. They didn't approve it just because of one phone call. They brought it back to the city. They got deadlines for everything. And now we can hold the city accountable. Well, you were supposed to have that study done by 2015, you know? How can we help you? How can we help you to make sure that gets done? So in reality, on second units, our little housing group for free has done almost all the research that the city should have done. So they kept asking, well, how many of these second units already exist in the city? They said, well, we don't know. We've never done the research. We had an intern from Fuller. He was a realtor. And he said, Jill, what can I do? I've got a whole summer. I'm glad to help. And I said, well, let's talk about it. Well, he had access to the MLS listing. He was able to go in and figure out how many second units existed in the city. And it was amazing. He spent tons of time working on this. And then finally, a few months later, someone asked the city at a public meeting, and they said, so how many do you have? And they said, oh, 740, exactly our number. So I have a feeling they kind of borrowed our research, or at least looked at it and thought it was well substantiated. But all this research, by looking at how many ADUs, accessory dwelling units, our city had already, because people were going, oh, we don't want those in our city. And we're going, just a minute, they're already here. So do you even know how many? And, you know, they don't seem to change the character of the city. Actually, they're part of the character of the city. They're a beautiful part of our city. And so, so how do we begin to look at research around this? So because we knew where all of them were, we had access to all their addresses, we plotted it on a map. There was a city planner on our little housing team. He said, oh, that's a fun project. At my work, I'll get someone to help me work on this and we'll do it. So I was out doing a traffic study, counting how many cars turn this way and that way and that way. And we figured out that where all these ADUs are, 750 all throughout the city of Pasadena, we found out that in one street, there'd be like 90, and the next street, nothing. So we did a traffic study on those two. We looked at property values. We looked at crime. We looked at the beauty, the curbside view. Zero difference between those two streets. Zero. And so we kept hearing people say, well, it's going to ruin the look of the city. It's going to do this and that. Well, we had research showing, we did this in 3 neighborhoods, all this research, showing that it was an asset to our community and it had no bearing on density and problems. So we had a lot of fun doing it. We got one of my homeless friends, actually the guy that stays in our house, in our back house, he came and helped with the traffic study. We had some teenagers come. They were involved in counting cars. So we became our own little fun city planners, in creating this opportunity. So we end up actually learning more than the city in many ways, which sounds crazy, but when I sat down during one of the public engagement times, there's a guy who was head of planning for the city of Pasadena, and he says, well, I'm required to meet with you. You're one of our advocates. And I said, well, I guess I'll meet with you since you're required to do it, And I had a list of about 10 different ways that he could create more affordability in our city. And he said, this is a great list. I've never seen anything like this. And I said, really? I said, you don't get this in planning school? He says, no, I never learned any of this in planning school. I said, wow. So I was educating them. And he was humble enough to say, thank you. These are great ideas. I really appreciate this. So I think it's really important. What's that powerful command from Micah 6:8? I have it on my business card. What does the Lord require of you, right? To do justice, love mercy, walk humbly. And so they're all interconnected. You can't do one without the other. And so you can't go in and think, well, I know more than you do, because we're learning together. We're learning together. And so it's so important, though, that we know what we're talking about and that we're accurate. Like today, I wasn't accurate on that one point about the amount of money spent on preservation in the city. But I wanted to mention the anti-camping because these laws have been taking place in different places throughout Southern California, and thankfully Monrovia is staying clear of it. So you know what I mean by anti-camping? So in your packets, I have a handout. So when you do your research, you're coming up with talking points. So these talking points are essential that you can equip people with knowing what to say at the city council. And so, for example, with anti-camping, we found out that our city council person, I'm going to give his name, his name is John Kennedy, and he's the one that proposed that we make it illegal to have any homeless in our downtown area, that they would be arrested. And we thought, wow, arresting people for being poor? That doesn't sound very American to me, And so I knew it couldn't quite be right, And so we found all this great research, how it's against the U.S. Constitution, and on and on and on. And we got all the key people and the nonprofits that have anything to do with homelessness that are really big names in the city. We had them come, and they took all these talking points. And you could see John Kennedy. He's like me, an external processor. My brain doesn't work unless my mouth is working, Then my brain kicks in. And so he was verbally saying to everyone in the city council, he says, that's a good point. Wow, and we're all kind of keep praying, And then he starts talking. Someone else gives another really good talking point. He goes, I think I kind of feel my mind changing on this, We're like, wow, this is great, So we kept praying and we kept praying. More people would get up to talk. And then pretty soon he says, I kind of think I'm on the wrong side of this issue. And then at the end, he voted against the very thing he proposed. He says, you know, it would cost us a ton to put him in jail. We could put that toward housing. This really doesn't make sense. I'm sorry for proposing it, you know. So we won that deal, hands down, and we had a lot of fun in the process of doing it. But we have sheets like this with talking points for every issue that we do. We have been able, I have pages of wins. We were able to strengthen the tenant protection ordinance. We started the city's housing department. We didn't have one before. On and on and on. We've done over the years with different deals. So I wish I had time to tell you about all the amazing deals we've done, but we've had a lot of fun doing it. So the third point is prioritize. You can't do it all. You have to choose which things are doable, that you know you can win, and which thing and that you have the capacity to do, as well as what it may not be the thing you think. It may not be what you think is most important. So, for example, when I lived in Mexico, it was very interesting because in the villages where I was, there was no bathrooms. None. I thought, well, certainly they want latrines. You know, there's a huge need for this. So we went through a whole process, a listening process. We went down to the local school, and everybody went through and wrote down all the things that their dreams for the community, what they'd like to see happen. Not one mentioned bathrooms. And I thought, well, it's kind of like what Rudy was saying. Who's leading this? Okay, am I telling them what they should have, or am I listening to what they want? And so we listened to what they wanted. Well, what they wanted was a basketball court. So I coordinated teams from all over the country and trained and equipped them. We went in and they funded these projects and they worked along with the villagers. It was a great learning experience for a week or two. And so that's what we did. We had all these gifts within the team down there. Some of them worked at the cement factory, so they had access to cement. Some of them had trucks. They had access, a way to get the cement there. Others had the land right next to the school where they were willing to donate it. So they had all the gifts to make this happen. And so what it did, it brought the whole community together. It empowered that community. They could point to that project and go, we did this. And it was a beautiful project. So it's not what I thought should be most important, it's what they thought was most important. And so we thought that we were going to try to do rent control years ago in Pasadena. This was in 2000, right about 2000. I was part of this advocacy group in the city, and I was so green at all this policy, and I thought, you know, sure, we can do rent control. I had no idea what I was talking about. We had 20 of us that lined up during an affordable housing task force ran by the mayor. It was Mayor Bogart at the time. And so we had all our talking points. We thought we were so smart. We go in, we give our talking points. And afterwards, you know, they're required by law to record the public comments. It's part of the Brown Act. And to say who spoke and what the topic was. It didn't even get recorded. I said, how is this possible? You didn't even write down that we existed, you know? And they said, well, it would never happen anyway in our city, so why would we bother? So I was appalled at the process, and I started realizing we hold the city accountable not just to getting the housing done, but the very process of how it should be done. And we're all learning together on how to make this happen. So building consensus, number 4. So Jesus, he said, are you with me? You know? He also asked a really important question that I think is one of the most difficult questions. What do you want? Remember, he asked the blind man, what do you want? Well, isn't it obvious? I want to see, you know? But we oftentimes don't know what we want. When I got married 7 years to Anthony, 7 years ago, I just kind of ran my life and never had to think about what I wanted. I just did what I wanted, but I didn't have to verbalize it or talk about it. So he was always asking me, well, Jill, what do you want? I go, you know, it takes a lot of soul searching. It takes a lot of internal work to really figure out who you are and what you want. Well, it takes a long time for a city and a community to figure that out too, and there's processes for that. And so it's important that we ask those questions. What do you want? And are we together? Are you with me? It may not be the very thing you want when you come together with everybody. Maybe you'll say, well, we want inclusionary housing in this city. Well, the rest of the team said, no, they don't want that. Okay, I guess I'll have to wait. It's not what I want right now, but you know. So you have to, there's some compromise in what it means to really be a team. And it doesn't mean things can't get done, it's just that it may not be the right timing. It may be that other things are priority right now. And a lot of times it has to do with what's going to be scheduled at the city council. So part of having a team is knowing what's coming on at the city council. So we have people on our team. One person monitors the city council agendas. Another person monitors the planning commission. Another person monitors the ed tech subcommittee. It's a subcommittee of the city council that deals with affordable housing. So we're tuned into what's happening, and you could just go on the city website and click that you want to have those agendas sent to you. You know, so they look through that and see, well, we need to be there. No, we don't need to be there. But that's more of a reactive way to respond to what the city is setting as their agenda. But we also need to think proactively. What do we want? What do we want to see happen? And how do we begin to move the city's agenda forward? And so that happens in these one-on-one meetings. And we began to meet one-on-one with all the different city council members. I know all the city council members. I've sat down with them over coffee, I don't know how many times. And we negotiate, and we talk. And we say, well, what about if we did this? And then, no, this, you know. And so we come up with something that we can agree on and that we think could maybe work and that they would be willing to take the risk to stand on. And then in the process, we can come to the city council and we already know our votes before we get there. We already know how that one, and that one is going to vote. And so, and we said, well, we'll be there to support you. John Kennedy has said, Jill, I won't vote for that unless you get 100 people at the city council. I said, okay, I'll do my best. So I think the last time he told me that, I got 50. I didn't quite get 100. But it's so important that if we tell a city council that we want them to, a council member, that we want them to do a certain thing, that we stand behind it and we give them all the support we can to make sure that they'll be supported in that. So bring crowds to public meetings. It's so important. Not all meetings are important. I will go to the city council sometimes with just by myself. I just want to sit and listen. And I'll bring somebody with me and we just, we'll listen. But when it's time to have a big action, you've got to have a crowd. And you've got to have not just the poor people telling their stories, which is important, because too often we forget what poverty's like. And people forget that that's happening right next door. And they need to hear those stories. I have gone into, there's a nonprofit called, what's the one for pregnant women? Pasadena, I can't say it. Elizabeth House. And I was at a conference with one of the directors there, and they kept talking about advocacy. You won't get any of this without advocacy. And it's so true. There is no laws that really require affordable housing. You've got to advocate for it. It will not happen unless you advocate for it. And so I looked at this director and I said, you're sitting on a gold mine. She goes, what do you mean? I said, all those women. She goes, what do you mean? I said, they're stories. They're powerful stories. They need to be told. She says, well, how do I do that? And I said, I'll show you. It's fun, So I went in there to the nonprofit and I said, you guys just tell me your story. Tell me your story. And so I start writing it down, and then I'll go to the next one. I'll write it down. I said, now you go type this out and get it, in a good, 3-minute story. And before long, they're all sharing their stories with each other, and they're in tears. And then I'll read the story back to them. I said, does this sound like you? And they go, yeah, that's powerful. I said, that is powerful. Now let's go. Let's go to the Planning Commission. They need to hear your stories. And they need to hear the stories, but those women need to tell their stories. And so in that case, we were trying to get a housing commission. And so they were saying how they had built their church networks, and they got jobs in Pasadena, and they had really built a home for themselves in the community, but they needed housing. And in order to do that, what we need to have a structure, a housing commission, in order to make more housing happen in our city. So the city council, they get tired of hearing from me, but I'll tell you, as soon as one of them speak, you could hear a pin drop. It was very powerful. But you can't just have the poor and struggling tell their stories. You've got to have wealthier people and middle-class people, and they've got to say, I can't afford the people I want to hire in my company. It's too expensive in this city. Or they can say, you know, at my house, I am hiring 20 people. I've got gardeners. I've got house cleaners. I go to get my hair done. I do this, I do this. And I'm tired of this traffic. We've got to have enough housing for everyone that serves us in our household. And these things have to change. One time I heard the rabbi speak. It was powerful. And he was at a big action, and he said, you know, our synagogue has a problem. Our problem is this: we don't have one person in our synagogue that needs affordable housing. We don't have one person that goes to public school. He went on and on. He said, you know, that's a problem because we're isolated from the real need. And we're the ones that are hurting because of that, because we don't know what. This is how we get to know God, by getting to know everybody and not just those people like us. And so, so bringing crowds is important. Sometimes you can do some public theater and some really fun, creative things. I wanted to mention Natalie because she's just a sweetheart. So I went to the Martin Luther King events in Pasadena. She won an award for her speech. We have an essay contest in Pasadena, and it was all about Martin Luther King and housing and homelessness. And she was at 11 years old. She already had this tender heart. Every time she saw someone homeless, she'd start to cry. And so she wrote her speech. She was in tears when she gave it. It was beautiful. She won $250 award for her speech. And I walked up to her and I said, oh, I love what you shared. Would you consider sharing it at the city council? And she goes, oh, sure. And I said, what about your parents? And they said, oh, okay, let me ask them, you know. So they come walking up. He was a doctor, just really, you know, wonderful family. And they went to the Nazarene church in town. And I said, is it okay if she comes sometime to the city council? Oh, yeah, whatever Natalie wants. We support her. That's fine, you know. And so they come to the city council, and their whole family's sitting in the back row, and they're supporting their 11-year-old daughter. And she gets up to speak, and you know, you only have 3 minutes, so it's not a lot of time. And sometimes if there's a lot of speeches, you get only 2 minutes, so you have to pare it down. So she was prepared, but she went just a little bit over. And they turned the little red light off so she could speak longer and finish her speech. And they were taking pictures of her from the city council. The city council members were texting me the pictures. They go, Jill, she's great, you know. And so it was just amazing to me to see the dynamics of what was happening within the city council. And John Kennedy, the gentleman I told you about before, he stood up. Oh, this was even more amazing. So Natalie, again, we were working on trying to get a housing commission. And so she says, well, I understand that one of the reasons you don't have a housing commission is because it costs money. And so I want to donate my $250. So she took her check and she walked over and she handed it to the city. So John Kennedy, he stands up, he's speaking not just to his colleagues up there in the chambers, but everyone. And he says, why does it take an 11-year-old to teach us what we all should be doing? You know, it just reminds me of Jesus, you know, and a little child will lead them. So everyone has a place and a role in this. So justice is eternal vigilance. I've heard my mentor, Dr. John Perkins, say this over and over again. And so you just can't, you don't have time to rest a lot. Before you know it, they pulled a fast one on you. So I love our city's inclusionary policy. It's just a wonderful policy, and I'm gonna mention some things about it right now. There was some, we talked earlier, there was a mention that that it takes subsidies to do that set aside. It actually doesn't. It doesn't require any subsidies. But our city is a city that a lot of people want to develop in. It doesn't work for every city. It may not work in this city, I don't know. But I know that in Pasadena it works because people want to develop there. And so they then are required to set aside a percentage of housing that's affordable. Well, there's been some loopholes, some things that we missed, and we were not at the city council, and they changed the ordinance on us, and they made it so that instead of that money, because they could have a choice, they have 4 choices. They can include the units, pay a fee, donate land, or build units off-site. So they switched it around so that if you build units off-site, that those units, you could give the money directly to a developer to do that, rather than having it go through the city's Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So this has happened twice without us realizing it. And it makes me just heartsick, because our city housing department could have multiplied that money. We could have taken that $10 million that was in the last affordable, it was the largest in lieu fee payment ever to our city. And we could have taken that $10 million and made it into $40 million easy, because it's called leveraging. When you put in money into a deal, and Julie can tell you this, you put some money in, and the city says, well, we're in the city, we're gonna put in $50,000 or $100,000. Then another funder will go, oh, the city believes in this project. Okay, we'll put some in. And then another funder says, well, I'll put some in. And then all of a sudden you've leveraged all this. So we lost all opportunity to leverage. And we lost any opportunity. $1 million of that would have been for staff for our housing department. Our housing department has lost 85% of their funding in the recent years because of all the cuts. We desperately needed that money. So we missed a huge opportunity because we were not vigilant. We were not paying attention. And it was the tiny little things. You know, it was one little sentence that changed everything. And we missed that point. So you have to stay in tune. And so I think that's kind of all that I was going to say on this particular